What's up, everyone? Welcome to Level 7. It is time for another episode of the Agents of Fandom podcast. I'm your host, TJ Zwarich, and I must say, as I am rewatching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., that term feels a little bit more important again, the welcome to Level 7, as I'm restarting Season 2, getting into it right now. Joined, as always, by my co-host and good buddy, Adam Blevins. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. I'm a little tired and a little overwhelmed. This is, as you know, but other people may not. This is like the first week for me that I've been at home writing full time, like as a living. I kind of have transitioned out of my other job and am now writing at Screen Rant and Collider for a living. So it's been chaotic, but it's also been really nice and has made me feel good. It's kind of been very vindicating and stuff. So I feel good, but it's also one of those things where I feel like I can't quite keep. There's so much going on. I can't quite keep up with everything, but I know that's a feeling that'll pass. That's what does Tom Hanks always say in that famous clip? This too shall pass. You think you know everything? This too shall pass. So always, take everything in stride, keep it moving. But the most important thing is how are you feeling? Because this is your first appearance on the Agents of Fandom podcast as a dad. You took only 1 week off last week. We missed you last week. We still had a good time, but we missed you for sure. Welcome back, Dad TJ, to the podcast, man. How does it feel and how are you doing?
It feels good. I'm tired basically always, but other than that, it's going really great. Natasha is wonderful. She's a week old. She's healthy. And it's like the last 2 nights, she actually slept wonderfully and I just didn't. So things are going about as well as I could hope. Kind of just drowsy and sleepy all the time. But other than that, great. Excited to get back into the swing of things with Agents of Fandom a little bit. I felt out of the loop and I'm looking forward to diving back into things and gonna try and not, burn out. Just keep it in a nice slow pace for a while and try and not burn out a little bit. But as we're both tired, it's important that we acknowledge like it's some exciting steps. You're writing full time. I'm becoming a dad. We're making moves here at the Agents of Fandom, and we're going to be covering one of the reasons you brought up feeling overwhelmed because there's so much going on is because we're covering 3 shows right now, and this will be the very last week we are covering Invincible, as it's the Invincible Season 2 finale. And we'll be covering, of course, as well, The Bad Batch, episode 10 and 11, a 2-episode release this week, as well as X-Men 97, episode 4. This one was fun because it was the first one that did not come with screeners. And so we're breaking all of these down. And make sure you're following the Agents of Fandom on socials at Agents Fandom on Twitter and TikTok, Agents of Fandom everywhere else. Go to agentsofandom.com, check out fandomify.com for the merch. And make sure if you're listening to us on YouTube, smash the notification bell, hit the like button, subscribe, and make sure you follow the Agents of Fandom wherever you get your podcasts as well. Let's start talking about Invincible. Comic readers knew that this one was going to be a big one based on the title of the episode. I thought you were stronger. And boy, was it ever a wild episode. It begins with Nolan, of all things. He's getting tortured. He's beating the shit out of people, showing that he's up at full strength. But the episode really begins when we see Angstrom Levy at the house with Debbie and at the house with Oliver, as menacing as ever, scary as hell, starting to go a little bit nuts with the amalgamation of all his memories throughout the multiverse coming into one. And what a way to make Mark's powers feel just minuscule and like they don't matter, as Angstrom Levy, with the power of the multiverse, has Debbie and Oliver's in his clutches.
Yeah, this was kind of like a perfect example of what is Stan Lee, that famous Stan Lee quote where people are asking him, like, who's stronger, Hulk or Thor? Who's stronger, this and this. And he was like, whoever the stronger character is whoever like writing the comic, whoever they want to be the stronger character. That's who will ultimately win the fight. Because like you said, obviously if you just put them in a cage where they can't, where it's just hand-to-hand combat, like Mark's going to kill him immediately, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. But he kind of makes him look powerless and makes him feel helpless here. And I got to say, just like broadly speaking, in terms of this episode, this season did such a good job, like kind of throwing me off the scent for what was coming. And I didn't know how much we were going to get. Like, I wasn't sure if the finale was going to be 100% Angstrom, like kind of like what we got, like have him pretty much be the focus, maybe like 85 to 90%, because we did get a few other things. But or if we were going to actually get to see the war, like the Viltrum War, kind of kick off. Like I had no idea what was coming. You know, I had no familiarity with the comics and stuff. So the funny thing, when I first watched this, I was actually a little disappointed. Not because I didn't think it was a great episode, because this is still like a 10 episode of TV, but I was a little disappointed because I'm so invested in this Viltrum War, because I just know that's going to be like seems like it's going to be one of the coolest things ever. And I was hoping we got a little more of that, but ultimately what we got was still really great. And yeah, just to circle back to what you said, it was really cool to see Angstrom, because I mean, I was wondering about that as well. Like when they get into a fight, I mean, Mark's been getting stronger since we first see him get his powers in episode 1, and now he's incredible. I actually just rewatched. I think it was pretty quick after I watched the finale. I rewatched the scene where what's his name that he gets in that fight in the first season. Help me out here? You know who I'm talking about, William.
You cut out right when you started asking that question, so I'm going to be honest. I missed what that was.
Oh no, I was what's his Mark or no Rick? Rick, that's the one I was thinking of. Rick, you know who? I completely when you said that I completely lost my train of thought. Well, just to keep it moving, I'll say yeah, that was great to see Angstrom and all that stuff. But yeah, I just botched that. I apologize because I lost my train of thought. But just keep it moving. That's why we needed you back, to keep it moving when I fumble the bag like I just did.
We're tired. We got a lot of things going on. It's bound to happen. But it was there was a few really interesting tidbits from that conversation between Debbie, between Mark, and then with Angstrom there as well, because it was terrifying. There's not much we feel like Mark can do about it. It's like edge of your seat television the whole time. And unfortunately, I think that Viltrumite war is going to happen to be season 3 and beyond. I don't think we're getting fully that. Obviously, we're not now that it's over. But with Angstrom kind of pulling back to being the big bad here, he wasn't there through large portions of season 2, but he definitely made himself feel menacing here in season 3. And one of the interesting tidbits that he revealed was that Oliver doesn't exist in all of these other, as Obi's freaking out about some. Oliver doesn't exist. Mark's brother doesn't exist in the other universes, or at least he hasn't come across him. And the other kind of really cool conversation was between him and Debbie, where he's trying to, gaslight her, make himself feel better. Like, don't you realize who you are? Don't you realize who your son is? In most of the universes, you join them. Like, you're part of this empire. You're doing all the shitty things as well. And Debbie says to him, like, Sandra Oh just giving the best voice performances as per usual. And just, she says, like, no, I'm the one who raised the one who isn't a killer. I'm the one who raised the Mark Grayson that said no to his dad. I didn't do that. That didn't happen here. So you're essentially, what you're telling me is that there are all these bad places out there, and you chose this one where there was a good Mark, a good Invincible, to come be the bad one. And it's such an interesting conversation between the two of them. It made the actual fight later on between Mark and Angstrom itself a lot less of the, like, that wasn't to me the exciting battle. It was the battle of wits between them all at the house.
Yeah, and just before we get into this, of course, as soon as I passed it back to you, I remembered the thought. So I'm gonna finish that so you and the people listening don't think I'm crazy. What I was gonna say was that fight with Rick, and I think Rick and Mark fights that cyborg. That's when Rick initially gets hurt and everybody thinks he's dead. I don't know what it was that made me rewatch that fight as I was watching this season 2, but Mark in that fight is like he's fighting like a lower level here, like a lower level villain, and he's kind of getting his ass kicked. And then now we see Mark just complete like in the fight against the Sequids in particular, he's taken on like thousands of enemies at once and doing all this, and he looks incredible. So that, to go back to your original point, I was just interested in how they were gonna like kind of juxtapose these two as heroes and villains, because Invincible is so much stronger. But they did a good job with that. But yeah, too, and to now go back to what you were saying here, what you asked me about here, like Angstrom is so interesting, because you can tell like part of him is really grappling and like having like struggling with what Debbie is telling him. Like this, I understand why you have every right to be upset, but you don't have a right to come here and take this out on the one version that's like actually reasonable. But to him, he's like, no, like I have to cleanse this, everything. He's like so angry and so like riddled with grief. He just can't process things normally, that it's like nothing. You can't reason with him at that point, which they kind of needed to do, because we get to see a very human and also like interesting and kind of compelling version of him in the first half of the season, because he's helping Mark and he's like, I know I'm not going to let you use, but that's kind of how this whole thing happens. He's like, no, like I'm not going to let you use this creation, use what I'm doing for violence, which is also why Mark is kind of so surprised when he shows back up. He's like, whoa, last time I saw you, you were like a good guy. Why are you here trying to kill me and trying to kill my family now? But they've just done such a great job navigating all that, because I had so many questions. And then by the time the finale was over, I was like, oh, everything makes perfect sense.
Yeah, that is a really good way of putting it. And during this battle of wits, Angstrom is constantly sending him through different dimensions. We get different fun things, like talking dinosaurs. But the really big thing from this episode that a lot of people I think were waiting on for one time was the potential appearance of Josh Keaton. And who would he be playing? Josh Keaton obviously is most famous for voicing Spectacular Spider-Man, and in the comics there have been crossovers between Invincible and Spider-Man, and while they obviously did not get the rights to Spider-Man specifically, for all intents and purposes that is exactly who this was. They don't say his name. You brought up that he's been going through the multiverse lately. He's sick of it, he's bored of it, he knows exactly what he is. He's got all of his powers in a different suit. He's fighting who? Prof Ock. Not Doc Ock, but Prof Ock. For all intents and purposes, this was Spider-Man from a different universe, and they clearly just didn't get the rights. Oh, you are muted.
Sorry, I'm so sorry about that. You had texted me that my mic was messing up, and I think I realized what it was. It was like way farther away from me than it normally is. So I'm sorry about that. But yeah, well, this was so funny, right? Because there was so much discourse going on about this. Like before the show even came back for season 2, there was all these tweets from like leakers, like Spider-Man's going to be in the show. And I was like, guys, like in this day and age when there's such a fight, like just think about what's going on between like Sony is terrified to use anything related to to use Spider-Man. I should rephrase that. They're not terrified to use anything related to Spider-Man, because they'll use anything and everything related to Spider-Man that's not Spider-Man. But they won't just put Spider-Man in all of these clearly Spider-Man adjacent character movies. So I was like, and that's all because of this whatever.
This was more Spider-Man than the guy that we got in Madam Web. This is more Spider-Man than.
Well, it really was, and I'm like, so I'm thinking about all these things, and I'm like, if Sony is having this much trouble when they have a deal with it's pretty much their character, they're just kind of letting Marvel use it, like is my understanding of the deal, because that's like that whole thing is weird. I'm not gonna get into that and speculate about that, because that whole deal I still don't really understand the point of that deal. But that was what I kept thinking about. I was like, guys, there's no way we're gonna see Spider-Man in a project like, and everybody's like, well, they crossed over in like the comics once, and it was like, this is an entirely different thing. Like to compare something like that there was just no way. So then when he shows up, I was like, oh, there's like nothing. This is just classic like Prime Video superhero stuff, where I'm like, there's nothing off the table for what they'll do. It's like how Gen V and the boys always manage to push the needle and show me something that I'm like, I cannot believe they're actually doing this. And then I was wondering, I was like, did they actually do this like for real? Is this going to take it like going to be a variant of Spider-Man that like you take the mask off and something that I would recognize, like something from the Spider-Verse? But they really did do it in a way that I don't want to say it's a fuck you, but it's like there's nothing. I would love to know the like legal logistics of all this. If there is any way that Sony or Marvel or whoever is like most in charge of Spider-Man at the moment is pissed about what's going on. I would love for somebody to ask like Kevin Feige or whoever is in charge at Sony now. Did you see that Invincible finale? And do you have anything, like any thoughts about that very clearly Spider-Man, but not Spider-Man and Doc Ock character? Because yeah, that was nuts, and I was not expecting it at all. So it was just an absolute delight.
So interestingly enough, I know that this is allowed in different capacities because there's a character in Young Justice, one of my favorite animated shows that exists. It's in the DC universe, and there's a character by the name of Black Spider, and he's a villain, and he's voiced by Josh Keaton, and it's Spider-Man, who's not quite as strong, and he shoots like ropes and stuff like that. Like it's Spider-Man. He quips exactly the same way. So as long as you don't use the name and I think the color scheme you're good to go in that capacity, maybe with depending on how long you utilize them for. But it's funny that Josh Keaton voiced that one too. It was also interesting to notice how his voice has changed throughout the years. It sounded a lot differently than it still sounded like a Peter Parker, but it sounded a lot different than his Spectacular Spider-Man time. I don't know if that was part of the deal as well, but I wanted to see if you noticed this because I definitely did, and I know you've been playing it recently as well. Josh Keaton recently became the first person to have voiced Spider-Man, Captain America, and Iron Man in various media. And when he did Iron Man for the first time, it was in the Midnight Suns game. And I noticed a lot of the Midnight Suns Tony Stark in this Spider Guy's voice.
See, I didn't catch that. I think because this actually, when we were watching this, like when the screeners came out and I last watched this, I don't know, again, I know this screams of press privilege anytime one of us talks about, well, when we watched this way back, but I actually don't think I had started playing Midnight Suns at that point, and I didn't even know, and I didn't know until you just mentioned right now that those were voiced by the same character. So I would be lying if I said that I picked up on some parallels there because I believe that was before my Midnight Suns time.
That's fair. That's a very good call. I didn't realize that, but that timeline does make a lot of sense. And as he's traveling through the multiverse, we get the interesting moment of another callback to the other of the two biggest superhero characters that exist. So you're a man dressed like a bat, and what's your name? Don't you think that's like a little unoriginal or whatever it is that he says? The little nod to Batman, a lot of fun there. And then finally, the fight with Angstrom Levy, he gets a hold of him. Angstrom says he was waiting until he was beaten down a little bit because he's gotten stronger from the doctors and he's ready to fight Mark now. Well, Mark beats the shit out of him. And it finishes with the iconic line, "I thought you were stronger," after Mark finally kills Angstrom Levy. Mark goes a little bit berserk after he found out that, or after Angstrom threatened his family. He says, "You don't threaten my family ever." And Mark kills him. And the next bit is essentially just Mark dealing with that grief, trying to, honestly, some high level introspection of, I didn't want to kill him. I thought he was stronger, but I did want to kill him because he was threatening my family. And if I didn't do it, he would have killed me. He would have killed my family. Oh, but I didn't want to actually do it. And it was wild how much the episode slowed down, but you could feel the pace of Mark's thoughts.
Yeah, well, that whole scene was really hard to watch. From the time they get there and you realize like Mark is losing it when Angstrom's on the ground, he's just pounding his face in. I was thinking the whole time, I was like, you got to realize you're not going to be able to get out of here. I'm usually not the kind of person to think ahead, but I was like, you got to at least let him stay alive long enough so you can get back home. And then sure enough, I'm watching that. And again, it was so hard to watch for that reason. And also it's like, Mark's been talking throughout this entire season about being afraid to mirror his father, to do some of the things that his father did, to kind of go down that path. And this is like exactly now for different reasons, but this is exactly what his father did to him in the season 1 finale. Like shot for shot, this is the same exact thing they're showing it the exact same way, which I don't think was a coincidence. I think that was absolutely planned because I'm watching that and I'm like, oh man, this is not good. Because again, he has a point. It's almost like, you know how people are always saying like Batman should kill people. Like, right? How many people would Batman have actually saved if he just killed the Joker? If he just did something? But then it's like you actually see Batman killing somebody, and you're like, oh, I mean, I get what maybe not like this. Like, I get why Mark's doing it, but I'm watching that and I'm like, oh man, this is not you, Mark. Like, this is not the Mark that I know. The Mark that I know would not do this, even though it was for good reasons. But I also have to say, I don't think we mentioned it. When he broke Debbie's arm, I completely lost any, like, I was like, I don't care what happens to him. Like,
it's over. In terms of that's when it's over.
Right. I was like, I don't care at all that I know Mark's probably going to kill him now. But that like lost all, if there was any small bone in my body that was still like, man, like, I get what Angstrom's doing. I know he's lost his family. Like, Mark killed his son and his wife and like all these things. Like, he doesn't even have a family anymore. So I get it. once he broke Debbie's arm, I was like out. I was like, kill him. I don't care. My only concern watching that scene was for Mark, because he's doing these like little Nolan-isms throughout the series that I don't think he's, a bad guy. And even we kind of get to see Nolan turn in and seems like he has better intentions now than he has in the past. That doesn't, excuse the things he did or said, particularly in season 1. But and this was just another scene that, again, as somebody not familiar with the comics, I wasn't expecting. And I can still close my eyes and see, like, and I haven't even watched it in several weeks, like close my eyes and see Mark over top of him in that like desert, just beating him to a pulp. And then when it stopped, even like my heart, I feel like was just racing, like about to pound out of my chest watching something like that, because it was so intense.
For the rest of the episode, Mark is grieving with losing that version of himself that had never killed anyone before, because that was, at the end of the day, the firmest difference, the most concrete thing he could point to between him and his dad is, I would never kill anyone. That's different between me and you. I'm here to save people. I would never kill anyone. And even though that's still his mindset, he can't point to that anymore. And so that's clearly something that is going to be burdening him going forward. We do learn multiple different things throughout from different characters. The Guardians eventually save Mark. The future Guardians save Mark, send him home. Eve professes her love to Mark.
Crazy.
That was crazy. I thought that was a little odd. I think there was just something about like the 40-plus-year-old Eve still talking to Mark that was just like, what is going on here? This was odd. And then the reveal that Robot was no longer the same guy. It was actually Rex in the robot suit at that point, which was a very interesting reveal. Mark gets home. He speaks to Eve. He goes to her for some comfort, puts his hand on hers, looks like he's going to tell the truth and say what happened. And no, he does not. He chickens out. He doesn't say shit. We're going to have to find out what's going on between them in season 3. We also find out that we were kind of skirting this one a little bit earlier in the season. Duplicates is alive. She had one version of herself hiding the entire time. Smart. Probably something I would have done too. She is reunited with our guy, Ross Marquand, who's, I don't know why I always, Immortal. The Immortal. I always forget his character name for some reason. They're reunited. It's a very touching moment. They could have provided there a very annoying, like, how did you not tell me? I'm so annoyed at you. But it immediately was, I understand. I'm just so happy that you're back, because that's probably how it should be. And it ends, the season ends with Nolan and Alan chatting in jail. Alan trying to recruit Nolan for a team up against the Viltrumites. And what kind of finally sways Nolan at the end is he says the iconic line from season 1 was he thinks of his wife like a pet. This one, it ends, I miss my wife. And so we clearly get like you said, we don't know if Nolan is going to, we can't forgive him for what he's done, but we definitely think he's going to be more on the protagonist side of things than the antagonist side of the story going forward. The final thing I want to touch on before we make the pivot to Star Wars is that I do think, as great as each of these individual episodes were, as great as the 4 episodes were as a whole, as great as season 2 was as a whole, the break really, really hurt. Nobody cares about this show right now. I'm talking to so many different people as it's happening, like, hey, have you watched it yet? What did you think about this? And there's nobody to have the conversation with, because after the first 4 episodes, momentum just died. 4 episodes is not enough to take a break. You can do a mid-season break if you're doing 16 episodes and you're cutting it after 8, but it really didn't warrant the long break. And I think that killed a lot of momentum and ruined a lot of people's excitement for this show.
Yeah, that was like a huge problem, because I was just thinking about that over the last couple of weeks. I was like, I feel like I'm seeing nobody talk about the show. And then I went and looked at Invincible socials, and I see there's like not nearly as much engagement as I saw, like especially in season 1, but then even in the first half of season 2. And I think they lost a lot of people with how big the gap was just from season 1 to 2. Because I know a few people that really liked season 1, people that when I watched the show and I loved it, and I was like, hey, I'm one of those people that as soon as I watch something and I kind of hyper focus on it, I just try to get everybody that I know to watch it, even if I know they won't love it as much as me. But I'm like, oh no, you're going to love this so much, you all need to watch it. And everybody that I put onto that show really enjoyed it. But none of them even watched season 2. They were like, yeah, once it got past like 2 years, I was out. I was completely. So even if they would have watched, I think that was the case for a lot of people, right? The people that were patient enough to stick by it for 3 years, then it was like by this point, I think they were pretty much the gap did everybody in. Like it makes me wonder how many people even, the specifically the super casual viewers were even aware of that. Like they probably, maybe some people that just started watching it and then they get up the next week when it's supposed to be episode 5 and they're like, wait, where's episode 5? And they look, it's like, oh, it's not coming out for like another 3 more. Like now we're in the middle of a season and we're taking a break. So I'm still all the way in. I still think this was a great season of TV. I'm not holding that break against it, but you're right. It definitely hurt them. And I hope it doesn't take us nearly as long to get season 3 as it did season 2. And I hope there's no break again, because they're already walking on a much thinner tightrope than they were heading into season 2 for sure.
They've talked about how they're going to try and speed up that process more going forward so fans don't have to deal with that. And there's no breaks for us either, because there's so much great content right now as we shift from Invincible to Star Wars The Bad Batch. And I'm going to be honest, I've been proud of the guests we've recruited for specifically Star Wars talk lately, because we brought in some experts, whether it was Katrina Dennis last week, Klein and TCR from the Reckless Rebellion podcast, and now another Star Wars expert we're bringing in today. I met this person in New York City at New York Comic Con this past year. Absolute wonderful human being from the Geekly Waffle Collider, so much more. Arezou Amin, how you doing, Arezou?
Hi, I'm doing good. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. And before we get started on the Bad Batch, why don't you give a little history on your Star Wars background?
Yeah, so I feel like a lot of us kind of grew up with it. It went on like personal hiatus for me after the prequels ended. I was like, cool, this is fine. It's like a background thing. And then the sequels came back and I was like, great, we're back, baby. We are so back. And over like just before lockdown and over lockdown, like the books kind of became my big thing. And it just kind of started snowballing from there. And yeah, now I host a Star Wars podcast. I write for Star Wars Insider. Like it just really, really snowballed from there. So yeah, that's like the TLDR of my Star Wars fandom.
Well, we are very excited to have you on the show. What have you thought about Bad Batch season 3 so far?
I am really liking season 3. I feel like I loved season 1, and then season 2, I was kind of like, where is this going? And I feel like now in retrospect, I'm like, that's where it was going. But I'm loving how focused season 3 feels. It really feels like it's properly living up to sort of the scale of the Bad Batch that we sort of thought it would have from the beginning. It's like really living up to that potential. It's telling some really interesting stories. I'm really, really loving season 3.
Adam, episode 10 and 11 released as a dual episode release this weekend. We almost, you put out some great recaps up at agentsofandom.com, but we almost missed the boat on that completely because I was, busy having a baby. And so I didn't notice that Disney didn't send emails for when the Bad Batch was out. It just kind of appeared in the screeners. But luckily, you caught that in time and managed to bang out a lot of recaps for that one. What did you think about episode 10 and 11?
Well, I think you're not giving yourself enough credit here, because it was not me that said that. You were the one that texted us and said, hey, check your accounts. I think we have the rest of the season. So you can't give me I'll take credit for writing the recap.
It was late. It was late though.
we still got around to it. But no, these were 2 great episodes. I thought the whole kind of all the episodes that we got to watch, I know we're just going to talk about 10 and 11, but they just continue the theme of everything that we've seen this season. As we watched through the first 8 episodes and now into this kind of part 2 of the final season, I keep expecting, okay, is it going to drop off here? And now it almost feels now like it's too late. Like I'm not expecting that drop off anymore. But after the first few episodes, it was great, and then we just kind of kept going. And maybe by like 6 or 7, I was like, okay, maybe they go into this little lull, like this mission of the week kind of theme. But no, this has just been absolutely phenomenal from episode 1, and they keep it up with 10 and 11. These are 2 more great episodes here.
Something that I thought has really enhanced this season is the mystery behind everything. It's like a puzzle that's just slowly getting unraveled more and more each week. And this week we get a lot more of that being unraveled. It was very much like an interesting 2-parter that we got, because they felt very disconnected while kind of coming together to show something very important and connected towards the end of it. And we get Hemlock, who is kind of the overarching antagonist over this, and he's just more and more sinister each episode. The more we learn about him, the more we kind of learn to hate him. And the one thing, though, that was interesting from the start of this is Dr. Carr, kind of aka Omega's sister, another clone, is the new chief scientist, and she's learning a little bit more about Project Necromancer. And that's been one of my favorite aspects of this season, Arezou, is how they've sort of started connecting to the sequels, because that's one thing Dave Filoni does better than anybody else is like, oh, we'll take something that hasn't been totally figured out yet, and we will give it an entire storyline behind it.
I love the sort of suspense that builds out from that, because it's like the Hitchcock definition of suspense, because we know where it's going, but they don't quite know what the end game of this is. So that sort of makes it more intense. And I'm also hugely relieved that we learned more about Project Necromancer, because I was a little worried it was going to be just like Omega is the M count donor for the Palpatine clones, and it was just going to be like too small a thing. But seeing like the scale of this project was, first of all, extremely chilling, and second of all, was such a good connection to the sequels, because it really does paint a picture of like the scale of this plan. What, like 30, 40 years ago? Probably longer. I'm not mathing right now, but
and just like, even when like you consider it to like the prequel lines of him talking about cheating death and him talking about learning that, we see that so much as, you know, just trying to sway Anakin and teach Anakin, but this has been something that's been on his mind for a while. And we also learn from Dr. Carr here that for Omega, it's not just that she's got an M count and that's why they're searching after her. She's gotten a very important binding DNA that she's the key to replicating it. Yeah. And so that does throw in all kinds of wrenches to you look at what we've seen in the future as well, with things like The Mandalorian of, oh, that's already begun being replicated at that point. Was that from Omega?
And then like, is that what they need Grogu for? Like, does he have that same binding like component to his DNA? So I love when puzzle pieces fit together.
I know I'm going to be honest. It is looking like this is leaning heavily away from my Omega is Rey's mom theory. I'm okay if I'm wrong. That's not going to stop me from throwing crazy theories out there. I'm going to keep doing it. But
wouldn't it be great grandma though?
Maybe grandma, great grandma. I don't know. I want there to be some kind of relation. I won't worry too much about the ins and outs of what it is. Like you said, I'm not mathing right now. But Adam, we see all of these kids being kidnapped and like recruited for their M count, kind of the foiled more evil version of what the Jedi were doing, because they're not recruiting them at a young age for their cause. They're recruiting them at the young age for a much scarier cause, and that is experimenting on them. What was your take when you saw this? Is that something you were expecting going forward? Because like, oh, if they were doing it for Omega, I guess they're probably searching for more. And did that immediately give you the same thought as me of, Grogu, no, don't, that's probably the same place they were going to take him.
Well, first I want to say one of the interesting things about this episode to me that you guys were just talking about, that M count, you know, we talked about this a little bit last week too, is Omega going to get her kind of forced moment like Sabine did in Ahsoka? Is she going to, because we felt like Asajj Ventress was being a little cagey about, and you know, like we talked about, Katrina did a great job of explaining her thought point on that, being that like she really just wants to kind of keep all that secret, because it's not really anybody's business except Omega's. And she knows especially what the Bad Batch are going to do with that information. I mean, not going to do anything bad, but she just wants to kind of keep Omega protected with that. But when I heard him say that it was more of like he wasn't after her because he didn't say something like she's got the highest M count since Anakin Skywalker or anything like that. It was more, I definitely didn't see that coming at all. And that to me was almost like them saying, hey, if you're waiting for Omega to have some big moment where she stops the Bad Batch from being crushed by some big rock or anything crazy like that, just don't expect anything like that, because it's not going to get it. And I actually really like that, because like we talked about last week, I'm a little over those big pulling the lightsaber towards them, stopping something using the Force. I think those moments are a little overplayed. So I'm happy that Omega's story kind of gets to play out on her own and doesn't lean into something like that. But I was surprised to see all these kids, because it seems like they've been so hyper focused on finding Omega that I guess I just never we never hear him mention like the other subjects or all the other kids or these kinds of things. He's been very cagey, very low key about all this stuff. And he mentions the vault. I think it's like episode 3 or 4. It's pretty early, maybe even one of the first couple episodes of the season. He mentions the vault, but then we don't go there. We don't see anything that was in there. I don't know why. I don't know what I thought was in there, but it wasn't children. And it just made me hate Hemlock even more because these kids are all so adorable and they're so wholesome. And to think that they're all just, and they also have this twisted sense, everybody that's looking at Hemlock in particular, that they're actually being taken care of there. I know we kind of skipped over the Cad Bane stuff, but that was
I'm getting
horrifying. That was horrifying to watch that poor child get taken away from his mother. Like, I just broke my heart to see that kind of stuff. But it's like for both Cad, I know you said we're talking about Cad Bane, but for him and Hemlock both, it's nothing more than like procedural to them. It's just like that part of their soul that makes us feel bad for these kids is just completely absent, and then which makes him just even more like an even more menacing character.
Before we pivot to Cad Bane, can I just add to that and say that like they've been saying the whole time, like Omega, like that's what they're focusing on. So we as an audience will focus on the same thing. So when we go down to this vault and we see all these kids in there, it's kind of like it's even more twisted and jarring for us because like, right, we didn't even think that this was happening to anybody else. We were just like, they're experimenting on this one kid, but like there's all these other kids that like the galaxy forgot, that we forgot, that like nobody else is thinking about. And it's such a jarring realization to have in the middle of this ostensibly children's show that we completely forgot about all of that happening. Like they mentioned it, like you said, they mentioned the vault, but we didn't care to examine that any further.
It's kind of the polar opposite of what they do in Star Wars Rebels. And they make Star Wars Rebels, one of the reasons it's so great is they make a point of showing that one of the reasons this worked is because it looks like a bunch of random attacks at random places. So that's why the Empire never fully notices what the Rebels are doing. Mm-hmm. But this worked in the opposite aspect of it shows how damn big the Empire is and how big its reaches grasp, because we're so focused on this one thing and our story of our people and our friends, the Bad Batch and Omega, that we completely forget like they're doing all this other terrible stuff at the exact same time. And it really did give that terrifying, oh shit, there's a lot more going on here than we realize, dark, sinister tone that this whole season has had so far. And the one kidnapping them, the one recruiting all these kids to the spot, it's one of the most heartless bounty hunters you will ever see, Cad Bane. And this is why you got to watch us on YouTube. This is why, like, don't get me wrong, podcast is great. If you're listening audio, that's fantastic. But we got the Cad Bane figure right here. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell, all those good things. This is one of my favorite characters from animation. This is also one of, I got to shout out our former co-host and actually Arezou's co-worker as well, Garrett. I got to shout him out because he is a big Cad Bane fan as well. And this did just give me the idea that obviously not next week because we still have so much going on with Bad Batch and X-Men. But when we finally don't have anything going on for the podcast, a bounty hunter draft. A bounty hunter draft, because I think that would be a really, really fun thing for us to do on the podcast. Arezou, what did you think about the return of Cad Bane? Did that give you the same as it did me?
It was one of those like, oh, kind of moments, because it was one of those things where when Cad Bane was on the show earlier, I'm getting them all blended together. But yeah, when he was here earlier, like past seasons, I was like, it's Cad Bane because they have the assets. It's Cad Bane because people know who Cad Bane is. Like it's for us, the audience. It's fan service. It doesn't mean anything. And I'm like, no, Cad Bane was on the payroll because he's the best. Like that's why Cad Bane's here. So it was just kind of, it was like I said, like those puzzle pieces. I was like, it's all coming together now. So I was like, I love when things make sense like that. So I was very happy to see him, like for that very selfish reason.
And we already got him in live action in Boba Fett as well. Or was it Mandalorian or Boba Fett he showed up?
Boba Fett.
It was Boba Fett, yeah.
Yeah, Boba Fett.
From the Desert Comes a Stranger, episode 5, I think.
Yeah.
It was the finale. Oh, no, they fight in the finale. That's what it was. I'm sorry.
He shows up in 5, and then they fight in the finale,
yes.
if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah, sorry, my bad.
And it's just like, it's so exciting to me that they keep going back to this well, because this is a well that I really enjoy. And over the last few weeks now, we've gotten Fennec Shand, we've gotten Asajj Ventress. So we're really starting to pick at different, a lot in the bounty hunting verse, but a lot of these different characters. He has always been one of my favorite bounty hunters. How about you, Adam?
The analogy you just used is that this is a well they keep going back to. The Cad Bane well, for me, could just cure all the problems with humanity. I don't know what it is, if it's the outfit, if it's the voice, if it's the fact that he never fucking loses. He like you said, Arezou, he's the best. That's why they keep bringing Cad Bane, because like when he's here, you don't ever worry about, oh man, something might go wrong with like Cad. You just know when he's there, he's going to get the job done, and it's going to be something that you're rooting against him for the whole time. Like, I'm like, don't take this sweet poor child. But I know he doesn't care about that. He's going to get paid. And even at the end of the episode, when Emery asks about like, where's this child from? He's like, no, he's basically just like, don't ask any questions that are going to get you hurt like that. You're just going to get yourself in trouble asking questions like that, which, oh my gosh. But I'm like, you got me excited all over thinking about, because when I first saw him, I love Cad Bane so much. And I wasn't, we get him in like, I think the beginning of season 1, and then we haven't seen him in this show since, if I'm not mistaken. So I wasn't expecting it. And then, he dies, quote, supposedly dies. It makes sense in Boba Fett, because he's also, I believe, super old at that time. So that makes sense. But I guess there's another thing that it's like the kids. I wasn't expecting him to just pop up. But everything about him, like I said, the voice, the outfit, just the fact that he's the best there is, the Cad Bane well, for me, will never run dry.
He's the best there is at what he does, and what he does isn't very nice. We do have Wolverine and the X-Men coming up next as well, but before we get to that, we got more Bad Batch to cover, because there's not one, but 2 episodes they dropped this week, and the first one was, of course, focused more on Hemlock and Cad Bane and Dr. Carr and the children, but the next one was focused more on Omega and the Bad Batch. And the interesting thing I find is, especially about introducing Cad Bane to this, like you guys said, he's the best. But one of the interesting parts of that is there are very few non-Force users I think I'd be worried about going up against the Bad Batch. The Bad Batch, I feel like, can hold their own against basically anybody who's not a Force user. Ventress comes in, she kicks their ass, because of course. And it was awesome. But basically any non-Force user, I think, like Hunter, Wrecker, they can go toe-to-toe with them. But Cad Bane, whoa, it starts getting a little bit more worrisome. But we switch back to the other side of the story. We get the return of Clonex. He comes in, he's hacking Fee, takes out Wrecker, finds Omega. It's a big chaotic thing, and it eventually leads to Omega surrendering. And that, to me, was a very poignant moment, because like we see so much of through like Ahsoka and through Obi-Wan that even though Omega is not a Jedi by any means, we get when they're looking for Jedi, how do the and Rebels, how do they get the Inquisitors? How do they bring the Jedi out? It's by harming others. It's by rifling through these cities. And eventually the Jedi, because of their compassion, go, screw it, I'm here. Kanan says, you know what, kid, guess what? I'm going to let everybody in on the secret. And that's kind of what we get with Omega here, because all this shit's going down in the city, and Omega kind of has that Jedi moment of stepping in and goes, yeah, I'm here. Take me, leave the people. Sorry, Arezou, what do you think? I forgot to throw it to somebody there.
Listen, my favorite thing about the sacrifice, as funny as that sounds to say, is at every point in the first 2 seasons, her brothers have been the one to do this for her. It's always been them sacrificing for her sake. And I feel like they really teed this up well, like early in the season when Crosshair is doing something, I'm blanking on what it was. And she's like, well, technically I am older than you. So like, it kind of makes you put in perspective, like how much of their infancy and their childhood did she just like witness, like with Nala Se. So she does, I think, feel that sort of protective big sisterness for them, even though they so often treat her like the baby sister. And I think this really like encapsulates that. She's like, they're always like sacrificing for me and like, sort of making sure that I'm the number one priority, but I'm going to take the time to make like them the priority. The people here are the priority. I will be the one to take that initiative. And I think like over the 3 seasons and over the season, especially, they've really teed up that huge growth moment for her. So as heartbreaking as it's going to be to see like where she's going and what happens, I loved this moment for her.
It really was the true passing of the torch because Adam, we've been talking a little bit, or not a little bit, a lot about Crosshair and his hand and his inability to get past this. Is it mental? Is it physical? And it goes back to the moment early on in the season where Hunter and Crosshair, when they're reunited, they have the argument, and Crosshair says, like, you're just mad because I'm the one who saved Omega. And they're really just fighting over this dad role for Omega. But in reality, Omega's kind of surpassed the need for that with both of them, and she is an equal to them, and in many different ways superior to them. And we see that in this episode where she's kind of the one who she surrenders, but ultimately saves the day for all the people around her after Hunter can't steal the ship, and after Crosshair can't make the shot to put the tracker on the plane.
Yeah, well, Arezou, I love what you said too. That's such a good point. That the Bad Batch has pretty much been doing this for her for the entire 3 seasons, and where has that gotten them? We're at the end of season 3, and they're still in the same boat. The Emperor or the Empire is closer to catching Omega than they've ever been before. That's since the start of the story. They've been chasing after Omega. So it's like, and this is another trope that we've seen plenty of times. This whole like, I'm done running. Like it's time for me to face what this whole problem is, but. Again, it works so well here because it feels like inevitable throughout this whole episode. There's never really anytime they get like a little moment of hope, it's like you said, where he fails to steal the boat or Crosshair can't shoot it. Like, it's like those moments of hope are so quickly, just like the ship, shot down immediately. And it's like, you're just left sitting there thinking about the inevitable, like, oh my gosh, she's going to have to turn herself in. There's nothing they're going to be able to do to save her. And when she does, it's like such an emotional moment because this is a great point you said too, TJ, that she is actually older than them, and they're not her fathers or anything like that anymore. That they're a group that all care about each other, and that doesn't make it any like just that she's outgrown that role. It doesn't make it less hard to deal with that. It makes it like more so because so much of like her growing up has been all because of them. So, I mean, obviously, I'm not discrediting anything that she's done, but it's so hard to watch because it's like an inevitable thing. It didn't hit all at once. It's like kind of like a slow needle. You can just, it's getting poked in. You're like, oh, I know it's going to come. And then finally it's like, it still hurts so bad. But yeah, it's like one of those, it's great to watch, but it's also devastating at the same time.
It's one of those, the episode ends on an interesting moment too, because you brought up earlier how it doesn't seem like Omega's going to get that big, force moment. She pulls the lightsaber to her, but they're still teasing a lot of different aspects with her connectivity. How does this episode end? All seems lost. She doesn't have any communications. She starts a meditation. I'm going to kind of avoid the theory portion of the segment because, Adam, I know you've seen the later episodes. Arezou, if I'm not mistaken, you have as well?
No, I haven't.
You have not. Perfect, because I haven't either. So you and I can theorize, and Adam, you can just nod.
I'll just turn my camera off and not speak.
Perfect, because, I didn't get a chance to watch the screeners ever. Either. And so where do you think this is going to be leading for her, Arezou? Because my thought process was if she is able to tap into the Force a little bit, maybe she's calling Ventress for some help.
Oh, I didn't even think of that. My focus was more on like the physical, like her, because I was tying it together with the previous episodes, so like what it's going to mean for like Car, like if she gets there, because this is somebody Car's attached to, so it's going to like trigger her crisis of faith. But I don't know. I would love to see her call Ventress. I would love Ventress to come back. Because I don't see who else that's been established in this show that would pay off with. Right? Because as far as we know, because they could pull a surprise reveal, like the Batch is not Force sensitive. So her reaching out kind of in that way Grogu did on the Rock in The Mandalorian is not going to reach them, but it could reach Ventress.
I mean, I would never say no to Ahsoka, even though that would make no sense whatsoever, but I would love it. But what was your... we didn't talk enough about Dr. Carr here either, because from just getting assigned as chief scientist through working with these kids throughout the whole process, it seemed as though she was lightening up a little bit as well with giving the toys to the kids. I don't know, do you think that was her, coming to the side of the light and being like, oh shit, we can't do this? Or was that just her finding ways to get the kids more comfortable so she could get what she needs?
I think it's in a much less petty motivation. I think it's her Hux moment. I'm a big Hux fan, so this is not like derogatory for Hux at all. But his kind of like moment of deciding to flip and start spying because he's had enough. Whether or not you think the reason makes sense, I don't particularly think it does, but I do think he had the potential to flip anyway.
I don't
I think
care
this
if
is
you
her-
win. I
Like-
just need Kylo Ren to lose.
I'm not sure I follow the logic, but I do like that he like flipped. So I think this is her moment of like, I don't know that I fully agree with the side of the light, so to speak, but whatever's going on here, I've had enough. So I'm like, so I think it's her way of kind of bridging that gap for herself. It's like the start of that arc. So she's not going to crumble the empire. She's probably not going to crumble the program. But if I had to guess, she's probably going to let all the kids go. And just kind of like, well, you have to round up some more kids, and then it's not my problem anymore. So I think that's kind of where it's leading. And I think Omega's going to be like the catalyst for that because she does have that connection to her. And, you know, like the emotional connection is everything, right? So.
Yeah, and I think Nala Se has planted the seeds, and I think Omega is going to be the catalyst, just like you said, to get her to flip that switch entirely. And Bad Batch is exciting. This is one of the most, I enjoyed the Bad Batch the first 2 seasons a lot, but it didn't come close to my favorite Star Wars project, which is Star Wars Rebels. Season 3 to me has really been on that level of like, this is much watched television. Before it was kind of like, oh, there's a new episode of the Bad Batch out. Yeah, we're probably going to cover it. I'll watch it. I enjoy it, but I'll watch it when I get to it. Now it's very much like, oh, yes, there's a new episode. I got to go watch it right now. And so I'm very excited to see what we get through the rest of the season. And another show that's like that, also on Disney Plus, it's X-Men 97. This was a very exciting one because we, of course, got screeners for the first 3 episodes, and then this one was brand new. Arezou, what have you thought of X-Men 97 so far?
So I'm really enjoying it. I've always liked the X-Men. I always thought they were fun. I think this is the first superhero anything I ever watched as a kid was the animated series. Like I have vivid memories of watching this on TV. That said, I didn't remember that this was like a follow-up to that. So I started the first episode going, I have missed something because this feels like it's already underway. But then once I realized like what was going on, I'm like, cool. And I will give them credit for all that this is a follow-up to the animated series. Like they catch you up pretty quickly. So if you're starting here or like me, you haven't seen the last one in a couple decades, you catch up extremely quickly. I love that they have the big angsty arc of those first 3 episodes. And then these are like fairly standalone. Like they still continue some themes, but like that the newest episode was 2 standalone kind of vignettes. I'm really enjoying the show. This is my very long-winded way to say I'm really liking X-Men 97.
I was like you said that it kind of ripped through those first 3 episodes, getting a lot done, doing some catch up, but also like doing entire comic arcs that span months in like 20-minute kind of things. But this episode, it did feel a lot more standalone. And when I had my interview with Marvel Studios head of television, streaming, and animation, Brad Winderbaum, he did say that one of 2 characters that would really get some time spent with them, really get their due in this series would be Jubilee. And I think we got the start of that this episode in Motendo. What did you think about episode 4, Adam?
Well, you know, I love the first 3 episodes, right? But this episode was just fine to me. And I think a lot of it was, like you said, it felt very removed from everything else that was going on. I missed a lot of the other characters that we've been spending time with. So much of what I enjoyed about the first 3 was that group camaraderie and just that team chemistry they had that was so effortless. And then I like Jubilee and I like Sunspot too. I like them both a lot, but I kind of left feeling like, and also this is my first, as I've talked about as well. I don't know anything about X-Men comics or even previous X-Men stuff. So all the, like, I saw people freaking out about, oh, they're doing Mojo and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, what's Mojo? Like I had no idea what was going on, what's coming. And but it was still, like I said, it was fun to watch, but I left kind of feeling like, what's it like? It's like after you eat like popcorn or cotton candy or something like that. It's like, yeah, like it tastes good, but I'm still hungry after. Like that didn't actually fill me up or actually satisfy me. Like not like the first 3 episodes that we did, which I thought were all 3 like brilliant. This to me was just kind of fine or okay.
For those who don't know, Mojo is, I think, my best comparison I could give, kind of a TLDR, would be a more messed up version of the Grandmaster from Thor Ragnarok, where he's got his little alternate dimension / planet. He brings in these different heroes. He makes them fight other people for entertainment and for ratings. And that's kind of his whole jam. But I do actually think this isn't something I realized upon first watch, but now that you bring it up, I think it does make sense that you didn't connect with this one as much, because this very much felt like the first episode that it was kind of like you needed to watch the original. You were like to have it be enhanced, because it wasn't a real ode to the original, a callback to the original, with Mojo being back, with all of just replaying Jubilee's greatest hits. So it was kind of an introduction to, here's Sunspot, a new character, where in the original Jubilee was the new character. She was the new recruit. Now she's kind of the seasoned veteran bringing in this new character while replaying her greatest hits. Did you kind of get that same vibe, Arezou?
I think it walked that line really well because I saw the cartoon as a kid, but I haven't seen it since. Like, I think it's been like 24 years since I've seen this show. So I think having it be like, here's our new character, here's our established character, and they're going to walk through Jubilee's big story beats is a really good way of like both fan service nostalgia for people who remember the cartoon, and also for like people who don't remember it or haven't seen it. Like, this is what you need to know about Jubilee in like 11 minutes, like really condensed. So in that respect, I really appreciated it. And it was just like Adam said, it was fine. It was fun. The Nintendo of it all, I know Motendo, but like the Nintendo of it all really took me back to my childhood. It was enjoyable. And I kind of appreciate, because I binged it, so I kind of appreciated the lighter reprieve from the really, really heavy first 3 episodes that we had, because there's a lot going on there. So I'm like, this had a more Saturday morning feel to it, like low stakes. I've got my cereal. I've got, I don't have school today. I'm just gonna, it had that sort of vibe to it, which I liked.
It's funny because X-Men always was the Saturday, there's no school today, I'm watching it in the morning with my cereal. And Spider-Man, the animated series, for me, maybe I was going to say maybe it's just a Canada thing, but YTV. You were watching YTV. You're a fellow Canadian. And so for me, I was always watching Spider-Man, the animated series, at 6 p.m. I'd get home from school. I'd get my snack or dinner prepared for me. I'd go downstairs and I'd watch Spider-Man, the animated series. And then X-Men was always on the weekend block. But it did have that Nintendo vibe. And it was like a lot of the animation was straight from the NES and Super Nintendo X-Men beat 'em up, smash 'em up games. So that was really cool. And another fun callback to the first one was the digital Jubilee. The older digital Jubilee was voiced by Allison Court, who was the original Jubilee from the X-Men the animated series. Now they switched up voice actors for this one, understandably and rightfully so, because Jubilee, of course, is Asian American, whereas Allison Court is a white Canadian. Not that the American Canadian aspect matters at all. It was the other aspect that does. But she said she didn't know that Jubilee had Chinese ancestry when she picked up the role. She was mortified when she found out. She definitely didn't want to do it again. So she praised Marvel for asking somebody else to do it. And Holly Chu has done an amazing job of Jubilee so far, but it was really cool to get to see the two of them interacting together. And also a fun mention for those who don't know, Allison Court was Lunette on The Big Comfy Couch, the children's show.
That's why her name sounds familiar.
Yeah. The Big Comfy Couch was, I don't know, is that an only Canadian one, or did that make its way to the States too? Are you aware of The Big Comfy Couch, Adam?
You know Lunette and Molly?
I have literally never heard that mentioned before right now.
She's a clown with a giant couch, and she pulls anything she
look
needs
up a
out
picture.
of the couch.
Yeah, that's the full premise. It's just like, we got it. We're on a big couch. Everything's here. What should we do? And I don't know why, but it was a great show.
Hey, it got kids up. It got kids stretching. There's like a clock stretch that they're really famous for. Like, every Canadian kid knows this show.
Yeah. And so, and there's I off the top of my head, pardon me if she's listening because I forget her name, but there's a friend that we made at a lot of the Canadian conventions who always is cosplaying as Lunette. And she hasn't been to one yet where Allison Court is at the expo, but I'm really hoping we can get one of those to line up and they can get a little fun picture together. But anyways, bringing things back, how did you like the video game aspect of this, Adam? Because I know you're a big gamer. Where did your gaming life begin? Like, what was the system that you really started going in on?
Oh man, I mean, what a question That was like a two-handed question, and where you just delivered like a soft punch and it just knocked me out with the second one. Like, what you think of the video game aspect of this episode? And then what's your history with video games? But the video game aspect of this episode, to answer these questions in order, this might be like a thing to scoff at, but it almost felt a little too meta to me in that Mojo kind of comes around. He's like, we used to do television, but now it's video games. I was like, okay, dude, like I get it. I like what you said. Maybe if I had connected with and seen Mojo in the original series, I would be a little more fired up. But to me, I was just like watching this character, like most of the time, kind of wanting him to just shut up. He was a little bit annoying to me. But my history with video games goes way back. I mean, I remember having the original Nintendo when I was little. I had a GameCube.
That's what I wanted. Is like, tell me it didn't start with like PS2, you know? Like I wanted it to make sure it was like from an OG.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I definitely started with the early, like the Nintendo. I know I had a Nintendo and then a GameCube, and then I believe it was a few years after the GameCube. Then I went from a Wii, Xbox 360 into that, which is it's pretty cool for me because now I'm getting paid to write about video. That's like part of my job, to write about video games at Screen Rant. So it was funny. I was literally having a conversation about that with my dad last week, and I was like, it's funny about all those times you told me that playing video games were a waste of time, and now I'm getting paid to play them and talk about them. So how about that? But yeah, I don't know. This episode was just the video game aspect of this episode in particular was it didn't work. As somebody who loves and adores video games and still even to this day plays them more than I probably should, it didn't really resonate with me. I wasn't like, oh, we're doing the video game thing. It just didn't. It didn't hit for me.
It was a nice aspect of you can't fully hold on to your nostalgic childhood. You have to move on, but you can still enjoy the aspects of that childhood. I like kind of the message that they were trying to portray there. Another thing I thought was pretty cool at the end of this episode, feel free to comment on any of that, Arezou, or just switch to this one, but it really seems like Jubilee leveled up at the end of that one. Seeing like the older digital Jubilee with kind of stronger powers, it seems like going forward, this Jubilee might be kind of much more useful and powerful in battle than she has been in the past.
I would like to see that from her. Because, like, as a kid, I gravitated to Jubilee, I think because she was the youngest in the group. So I'm like, I am also quite young. So I, like, really attached to her. So I've always had a fondness for Jubilee. So if this means leveling up, if this means taking on a bigger role, then I am 100% here for it.
What did you think about the introduction of Sunspot? Because he was not a character who was part of the original, and it looks as though they're building a little bit of a romance between the two of them. What do you think about their romance? And I also want to know, speaking of two-handed questions, one's a light one, one's an uppercut. What's your take on the Rogue and Magneto romance from these past few episodes?
I'm here for it. I'm such a romance person. Like, in anything, I think whoever says there's too much romance in media is not paying attention. There's not nearly enough. So the fact that there is so much romance in this show that's Rogue and Magneto, which I'm here for, because why is he hot? Why are you making him sexy? Don't do this to me. But also, like, so sexy. And there's like, you know, Scott and Jean, and then there's like Jubilee and Sunspot, and like the next part of this episode, like Storm and Forge have a little something going on. Like, there is so much chemistry and romance, and it doesn't diminish anybody's plot. It enhances it. It adds to it. It's its own separate thing, which I just took this like so wide. But I was so excited when they kissed at the end. I'm like, yes, every component of the show is going to have romance now. It's not like when we move away from the Rogue, Magneto, Gambit little triangle there that we're like not going to see this kind of tension. It's just going to be everywhere.
The X-Men be fucking, and if there's one thing you can probably, if you know the X-Men are going to be doing, they're going to be schmoozing, they're going to be romancing, it's going to be physical, it's going to be emotional, and it's going to be messy. It's going to involve a lot of different members, and it's going to be messy.
All these really hot people running on constant adrenaline live in the same house. There's no way they're not fucking constantly.
It's true. It's like, we've all seen reality television. We know what happens when you put all these hot people in an island or things like that. Now you're giving them stressful life and death tasks and bringing them all into the same house. It's bound to happen. we pivot this episode. Adam, I actually want to know what you think of the kind of storytelling aspect of this, because this did very much feel like two different episodes. We get the Jubilee and the Sunspot and the Motendo stuff, and then it basically just cuts right in half and says, "New episode. It's time for Storm and Forge."
Yeah, I like the Storm and Forge stuff way more, and I think that kind of goes back to what I was saying a little bit at the beginning, that I really enjoyed just like the group camaraderie that we were seeing, and also I know that's not really, they're still kind of two people doing their own thing, but like I'm so invested in Storm either getting her powers back or like kicking ass. I know she's going to kick ass without him and all this. So I was really wondering kind of what we were going to do with that. And you and I talked about last week when I said, because you're usually one of my guys that like gives me the history on characters and stuff. So I was like, well, I don't even know what are Forge's powers, and you were like, yeah, I don't know. So it was nice of us to actually get to learn about his powers this week, and that's one thing that I love about the X-Men is that like when I'm learning, because it's constantly a learning experience for me, even just like learning about Mojo on the show, the way you just described him as like an alternate kind of X-Men's version of the Grandmaster. That sounds pretty cool. Like if I knew about that going in and knew kind of what to expect out of him, and maybe I would have, and even watched the episodes prior that contained, and that might would have resonated with me a little bit more. But oh man, like they also, the two of them, like their chemistry. I completely lost my train of thought. Excuse me. I was going to talk about Forge's powers, and what I was saying is that it's what I love about the X-Men is that as someone who's always learning about them and the villains and everything, all the characters that are in this universe, it never ceases to amaze me how like interesting and unique each of their powers are. There's always like this, he can create everything with, like if he gets into a fight with somebody, he's probably going to get his ass kicked, but he's a great asset for building things and doing all these kinds of crazy, which is what I love, because so often we see some of these characters and their powers and there's like move sets and power sets kind of recycled in different mediums and all these different things, that it's nice to see something like this where I'm like, wow, like not every team has one of these guys. This is actually really, really cool. And I hope we get to see, I know, they kind of go their separate ways and they have their little spat and stuff at the end, but I hope we get to see more of him. But like, oh my gosh, all this stuff works so much better for me. And then I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but Storm like trying to call out again to the wind and the breeze and all this kind of stuff, and it hit just as hard for me here as it did at the end of, I believe, was it the first episode or the second episode when she gets her powers taken away? It hit just as hard for me here because I know Storm can kick ass without her powers, but I also know how bad she wants her powers. And I'm right there with her. Like, I want her to get her powers back so she can be happy for herself. Not because I'm like, oh, Storm is boring without her powers, because she's not. She's still a great character, but I really want her to get her powers back because I'm tired of seeing her be sad.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. And I want to bring that back to Forge thing real quick, because I'm very happy as well how he basically gave us the lowdown on his powers, and he said, hey, if I can anything I can imagine, I can build. Because it's so hard to power scale X-Men characters because they've all been around for so long and they've all died and been reborn 12 different times with different powers. And it's like, you watch Deadpool 2, you would never know that Cable's, if you look on Wikipedia, Cable's powers, it says telekinesis, telepathy, teleportation. You don't see any of that. So it's like they change so often. It's like, it's so hard to know where they're at right now kind of thing. So I was happy Forge kind of helped us out with that one a little bit. But I'm 100% with you on the Storm side of things. What were you going to say, Arezou?
Oh, I was just going to, like, jumping off of the Storm thing. I think, like, coming off of the Jubilee half of the episode, which was, like, really lighthearted and a lot of fun. And then it comes to this, and I think this says a lot about how I watch TV, but when she does reach out, like, for the wind and she can't feel it, and this happened when she lost her powers too, it was like, her power is so unique in that it's, like, really tapped into, like, everything around her. It's not something she needs to use in a given moment. It's just like it like almost feels to me like constant background noise. And we really get the time, like, without all the other stuff going on, with her here, to really appreciate how, like, quiet it must feel to her, and like how removed she must feel, because like she can still see the sun and feel like the objective breeze, but like doesn't have that connection to it anymore, and how disconcerting that must be if you've lived with this your whole life. So like, I'm with Adam. I want her to get them back. I know like some people would probably be happy without their powers, but I want her to have hers back because it's just so, I mean, it's a great arc for her to like have to fight for them back and like figure that out. But yeah, I just like was thinking about that the whole time. Like, what does that feel like to be so used to this and just not have, it's not even kind of there anymore.
It hurts so badly too, because I brought this up on the last couple episodes, but when Storm is a character now, I mean, it was multiple of them for as great as fun as many aspects of the live action X-Men movie are, less as you get to the end. But outside of Wolverine, they don't do a lot of the characters justice. Wolverine, they gave all of their attention and their money and their love to, and the rest of the characters kind of got left to the side, outside of maybe Professor X and Magneto. And this is true for maybe outside of Cyclops, no one more than Storm, who by the end, Halle Berry is great, but again, Halle Berry is not necessarily the actor that should have been chosen for Storm. Same thing when he goes to the later ones, and the rendition of her character they end with is in Dark Phoenix, where they're having a party and Storm is making ice in people's drinks. That is not the goddess of weather. You know what I mean? Like, this show did such a good job giving her due right off the bat, with Cyclops going, give him the forecast, and then the Sentinels going, Omega mutant alert, and her coming in and blowing them all up. It was so cool. And so it makes it hurt that much harder, where it's like, we got Storm, she kicks ass, hell yeah. And now she's just so distraught, and understandably so. And you guys both of you broke down the Breeze thing so perfectly, so I won't add to that. But her story kind of takes an even more difficult turn, where I was talking about Magneto in the movies. One of the things that I love with him is there's so often Fassbender's Magneto tries to do the right thing. And as terrible as X-Men Apocalypse is, it does make you feel terrible for Magneto when it's like, he's living a family life, he's doing his thing, and then they find out who he is and they kill his family. And it's like, come on, he was doing everything right. And that to me feels like he can't catch a break. And that feels a little bit of what Storm is going through right now, where it's like things are getting better. She's working with Forge. There's a little bit of chemistry, a little bit of romance. And she finds out that he's the one that helped create the device that made her lose her powers. Adam, I like knowing some comic history and stuff like that. That one totally, I didn't see that coming. What was your reaction when you heard that?
Dude, it broke my heart, because it seemed like they had such a good little thing going here. He was so invested in helping her, but this also doesn't. He did the right thing, right, by telling her that. Like, that was absolutely the right thing to do. He shouldn't have kept that from her, because if she would have inevitably found out from somebody else, it would have been even worse. Especially if at that point when she does find out, she already had her powers. But it was like, it was so interesting and like really heartbreaking, because I'm listening to it and I'm like, no, like, I just met you, Forge, and I liked you, but I don't like you as much as Storm. I was rooting for Storm more, and now I feel like I can't root for you anymore, even though. And then he lays it out too. It's one of those. It's like a perfect example, right, of how it's so rare. I was gonna say not always, but it's like rarely ever black and white. Like, we know Forge didn't go help the government and do these things because he's a bad person, but it's like, he still did it. It's one of the, ignorance isn't innocence. It's one of those things like that. So it's like, I want to not be mad at you, because you never know. Like, he talks about the things that he was going through and the reasons that he did it. He was in a bad place and doing this kind of stuff. So I'm like, I relate to that. I get that. We've all done things we're not proud of. And what does Ted Lasso say? I don't believe anybody should be judged by the actions of their lowest moments. But I'm like, why that? You had to make that right there. You couldn't have made him anything like it's, because I think too, I'm like, how would Magneto respond if he didn't? He would probably just try to kill him immediately, knowing that he made something that's capable. And in situations like that, we talked about, it was either last week or week before last, that the only thing Magneto has really ever been, guilty of, granted, he's gone way too far plenty of times, but he's only ever been guilty of trying to protect his people. He's never just like gone on the aggression unnecessarily, like, and just gone and killed a bunch of people when he didn't need to. It's always been to protect mutants. So I'm like, oh man, if Magneto learned about this, he would probably just kill him immediately. And I don't know if I would blame him, but I also kind of like this guy and I want him to be good. And like to get me that kind of invested and also tugging me in so many different directions, on a character that I just met and have spent less than 20 minutes with. That's why I like the second half of this episode so much more than the first.
I almost wonder if that's going to come into play kind of down the line, because Storm's upset now. Storm doesn't have her powers right now. And as far as she's concerned, in her current headspace, it's Forge's fault. But like they do have that conversation where like, how could you help them? And he's like, I didn't have a choice. Like, and he's explaining his reasoning. And I think at some point she's going to have to make that call, like whether or not to acknowledge that he's right and he didn't have a choice. Like if Magneto finds out, Magneto's ready to kill him, and then like maybe Storm has her powers back, and even maybe if she doesn't, and she's like, but like you said, we can't judge him by the actions of his lowest moment. And then she's going to have to make the call whether or not to be like, actually, let's forgive him. Let's put him on this redemption path. Like, because too, like she's walked away from the X-Men right now, but I think given some time and perspective, she's going to realize that when she was, like a younger mutant, she was brought into this community that like has resources, that has each other's back, that really like helps each other, so that none of them have ever really had to make a decision like what Forge did, where it was like, well, you want our help, you got to build the thing. Like he was put in a position none of the X-Men really were. So I think given some perspective and some time, like she'll probably come to see that and then have to make that call. At least I hope so. That would be interesting, I think.
I think there's going to be more of Forge's past that's going to be dug up here as well, because the character introduced right at the end of the episode is known as the Adversary. The Adversary is a demon who has, guess where he came from? You want to know where his origin is tied to? Guess what? It's Forge. Forge, who not only has an intense knowledge and genius for technology, he's got that same genius and knowledge for sorcery. And when he was fighting in the Vietnam War, he accidentally summoned a demon. And now this demon sometimes comes back to haunt and fight the X-Men. It's been linked back to Forge, his cultural history. Forge, the character, is Native American. He's Cheyenne. And this character in this Adversary is supposed to be compared to kind of like the Great Trickster. And it's magic. It can bring people back from the dead. It's got all kinds of dimensional travel and strength and scariness. So there's a lot of potential different ways that they could go with this here. What do you think that they got to get right, Adam, between this Forge, Storm, and Adversary story going forward?
Well, first, I just want to say you made me do a little bit of a double take right there, because you said Forge's prowess that he has with like mechanics or like and electronics and these kinds of things he also has with sorcery. And then you were like, and then he accidentally summoned a horrible demon. So I was like, wait, that's like you saying, like, imagine like he has this great prowess with mechanics, but he accidentally built a car that blew up as soon as it started. It's like, wait, what?
Imagine as Doctor Strange was getting going, he found he accidentally found Dormammu before the Ancient One or something.
Okay, yeah, I get what you're saying. I was more just kind of giving you a hard time, as I have to do at least once every show, and we were getting too close to the end, and I realized I hadn't done it. But I don't know. I mean, honestly, that's a good question, and one that I don't have a specific answer for, of something that I'm personally looking for, because I didn't even know who that character was until you just mentioned it. Or even when I saw it on the rundown and I was just looking through it, I was like, wait, how did this? And then I went back and I had to just look it up right now. I was like, oh, that's right. The episode ended on something like that. So I have no idea. I don't know. I just, for Storm and Forge in particular, I really don't even know what I want. I don't know if I want her to ultimately forget. I think she probably will, especially if she's able to get her powers back. I think she probably will. But I would love to see, Arezou, like you were talking about, maybe a situation where she does, but by that point, like other people have found out, and then it's going to be up to her to decide, like, hey, do I want to stick up for this guy, or do I want to let it, like, even though I forgive him, I'm not going to force everybody else to forgive him too, like that kind of thing. So I don't know. Like there's a lot of different routes they can take that I'll be happy with, just for the two of them. Cause like I said, I have no idea anything about the Adversary outside of what you just said. So I'm not going to go super into what I'd like to see about that. Okay. I'm so glad that it's not just me. But I do hope we get, a little bit more of them going forward. Like that it's not just the kind of thing where that's resolved in 2 or 3 episodes. I don't even know how many episodes we're getting of the show, but I hope we don't just see like a little bit more of Storm and Forge for like an episode or two, and then we just never see Forge again. Like if Storm gets her powers back at the end of next episode or episode after next or whatever, and then she goes back and wants to join the X-Men. I hope that that's not just kind of the end of Forge. I do still hope we get to see, because I do, as pissed off as I am with him, I do still like him. I was enjoying spending time with him. So whether he decides to join the X-Men too, or whether he decides to stay where he's at now, I don't know, but I don't know. I'd like to see them kind of flesh that out a little bit more, and also get him. I was about to say I want to see him answer for his actions, but that sounded really harsh and not. When I first envisioned it in my head, that's not at all what I was intentionally like. Oh, he needs to.
You want a redemption arc?
Yeah, something like that would be great. Even though but then at the same time, I'm like, I feel like he's already working like the redemption. He's already working so hard on that, right? Because he's not still building that. Not that we know of, still building these weapons or doing anything like that. That would be something that I guess I don't want to see, some kind of crazy turn where it's like, oh, I'm actually still doing it and I'm an evil mutant. But I don't think they would do anything like that, because that, even as I'm saying it, that sounds stupid. But yeah, a redemption arc would be nice. I've already been talking for too long about this, about something that I opened up by saying I don't know, and then I went for like 5 minutes on. So a redemption arc would be nice.
Nothing wrong with some speculation. I like it. And for what it's worth, there are 10 total episodes of X-Men 97. Next episode is called Remember It, followed by episode 6, Life, Death, Part 2. So it sounds like that week we will not be seeing more Forge and Storm, and then we'll be focusing on that arc again the following week. What are you hoping to see out of that relationship, Arezou, and how do you hope that builds going forward?
Like for Storm and Forge?
Yeah.
I want
friends, foes, lovers.
I want romance. Anything to me will always boil down to they should kiss. But I do think him having to go on that kind of like Adam said, like he's on that journey, but I want to see that journey play out. I don't want him to do one nice thing and then die. Like I want him to have a chance to like really take the time and like atone and kind of work on that. And I would like to see them kind of patch up from where they are now to like friends, to maybe something more with like the appropriate amount of action sprinkled in there. I'm well aware, for as much as I've talked about romance, this is not a romance series. This is a superhero action series. But that's what I'm hoping, because the chemistry was simply too good for us to waste it.
It really was. They had strong chemistry between the two of them, and there is, I think, comic precedent for them to be together. Of course, Storm's main comic romance is, of course, T'Challa, the Black Panther. But there has been some Storm and Forge, but in the past, like there has been between most of the X-Men, I think, going forward. But we do have, like I said, next episode is called Remember It. Then it's Life, Death, Part 2. Then it's Bright Eyes, which I have to imagine is going to be a Cyclops story. Remember It, I'm wondering if maybe is going to be the Morph story that Brad Winterbaum talked about in that interview, because there does have to be more explored between him and Mr. Sinister. How is Morph still alive? Why is Mr. Sinister going to be the main villain going forward? If he is, I don't even know. I just kind of assume because he cloned Jean. But then the final 3 episodes are part 1, 2, and 3. It's Tolerance is Extinction, Tolerance is Extinction, Tolerance is Extinction, part 1, 2, and 3. And so it seems like these last 3 episodes are going to get really wild. We're going to get maybe a few more linear stories with a specific character here for the next couple weeks. And then things are really going to turn to a conclusion at the end. And we'll be covering all of it here on the Agents of Fandom podcast each and every week. We'll be talking no more Invincible. Invincible has come to a conclusion. We love you, Invincible, but we are done on that one for now. But we will be back next week talking X-Men 97 as well as the Bad Batch. You can find the Agents of Fandom on socials at Agents Fandom on TikTok and Twitter, Agents of Fandom everywhere else. And then, of course, make sure if you're watching this on YouTube, hit the notification bell, subscribe, and follow the Agents of Fandom wherever you get your podcasts. Next week, we have a very special guest as well, co-host with Arezou at the Geekly Waffle. It's Candace Kaw. And so, like I said, we got some Star Wars experts. We got some really great guests coming over the next few weeks. Arezou, where can the people find you on socials and, of course, all of your amazing work?
Yeah, best place to find me, for better or worse, is still on Twitter. I'm just at Arezou Amin there. I'm on Instagram if that's your thing at RZD2. I'm still trying to figure out Blue Sky and Threads and all that. Slow on the uptake, but I'll get there eventually. As for my work, it's all in my bio, but I write at Collider. I write / podcast at the Geeky Waffle. I'm rarely in Star Wars Insider, but I'm there too if you're so inclined.
And make sure you check out Geeky Waffle and all of Arezou's work over at Collider and Star Wars Insider, everywhere else as well. Hopefully, you and Adam will get a chance to work together soon over at Collider, since he is, of course, one of the newest members there as well. Hopefully we'll get a chance to talk with you here again in the future on the podcast, because to be expected, you were an absolutely fantastic guest. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you guys so much.
And we'll be back next week talking more Bad Batch, talking more X-Men 97. On behalf of myself, Adam, and the whole Agents of Fandom team, thanks for tuning in, everyone. We will see you next week. Peace.